vehicular assault cases. We want to talk, as criminal defense attorneys, we want to talk about what we see as live issues in 2014 relating to these kinds of cases, and what I think people need to pay attention to or need to be aware of, at least in our opinion. And starting with, what is a vehicular assault?
Well, you got to look at 4 elements that come into play. Well, 5. You have an accident in which you're involved, so that's the first element. Then the second element that the courts are going to look at is how serious are the injuries, or was somebody actually killed while you were driving? Next one is, were you driving in a reckless manner? Next element would be, were you driving with disregard for the safety of others, or were you driving while under the influence of drugs or alcohol? If any 4 of those elements can be established, more likely than not, you're looking at one of those 2 charges. Now, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say that I have a friend of mine who's in the SPD, Seattle Police Department, and he was talking about the vehicular homicide stats that were going on in the last year, in 2014, and they were talking about how the stats have gone up about 10 this year, meaning 10 more people have been killed because of it, and his correlation is because of marijuana, and he's starting to say because that's legalized, he thinks that, and that goes to the issue of whether under the influence of drug or alcohol. For me, that's a real concern as a criminal defense attorney, because I supported and continue to support legalization. The problem is that people don't get that you can be too high to drive, and even if you've regularly driven high all your life, if you get in an accident or a little high, it's like having a beer or 2, they're a little high, you get an accident and they get a blood draw on you, and they get it over 5 nanograms, you've got a real problem.
You got a huge problem.
And it used to be that there was some issues. People will say, well, there was some case law a couple years ago where they were suppressing blood draws. The Supreme Court said you can suppress blood draws for various reasons. Since that time, however, in 2014, that's long exhausted and no longer relevant. They have specialized warrant proceedings or process for getting warrants and for getting the blood draws in these cases, and Washington's worked around that ruling. So really it becomes more of a chain of custody issue, which means who touched your blood, how can they prove what level it was. These are the kinds of issues that I think as criminal defense attorneys we can explore, let alone the practicalities of the accident itself, like brake issues, right?
Right. And one thing you got to realize with vehicular homicide charges, the prosecuting attorneys as well as the judges are very open to allowing a case to just kick down the tracks to see how significant the damage is to the individual who was hit. They'll give a prosecutor 12 months, even 24 months to say, all right, how significant are the injuries? Does the guy have a traumatic brain injury? Did he get out of the hospital? Is he able to walk? Can he go back to work? Is he dead? It's just a matter of what was the final extent of what you did to this individual while one of the 4 elements were reached. That being said, what you need to look for is what's going on with the vehicle. You may have thought your car was fine. The problem is that if you had it down at the auto parts store and you think the brakes are great, you go in there, the cops have already towed your vehicle because it's been involved in a wreck, they go in, push your brake pedal down, and it's stuck to the floor. Well, you know what? If you have a failure of brakes, that's really not intentional, and although you were driving the car, it did get involved in a very serious accident, somebody may have been killed, that's a mitigating factor, and that's something that we can use to your advantage.
Even sometimes it's an intervening factor is
right.
I think what the law looks at it.
Right.
So, if you get in an accident and you were arguably driving in a reckless manner, but you weren't driving in a reckless manner, your front right tire froze, locked up, blew out, and you killed somebody, and the cops are saying, well, you were driving in a reckless manner, or you were driving at 70 and a 60,
right,
or something like this. The question becomes whether the failure of the mechanics of the vehicle was the problem, or some other intervening event took place, at least from a criminal defense attorney, that creates the kind of arguments that we can start making about proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And it really goes to what if we can create reasonable doubt, or more importantly, if there was reasonable doubt there to begin with.
Right. And if we can start going down that path, what more likely than not it's going to do, it's going to save you a homicide charge if the individual was killed, and it may get you a vehicular assault charge. If it started out as a vehicular assault charge, well, then we may have some issues on like an assault too, and maybe a DUI or something like that, because you don't go to jail on those necessarily, whereas with the vehicular homicide or the vehicular assault charge, you will be going to jail.
The other thing I guess that's relevant is people understand that there are Department of Licensing actions relating to these where you will lose your license, your right to drive, as a result of this. significant periods of time. So you better make sure your lawyer knows that and is also willing to address that issue as part of your case. And on vehicular assault charges, there's one more.
You're going to go to DOL on both of these, so it doesn't matter. Odds are, if the case isn't filed yet and they're waiting for it, you don't have an issue with the Department of Licensing. But if they filed it and you're on the calendar getting kicked down, Department of Licensing will probably already sent you a notice. You have an obligation that once a charge has been filed on something like this to request a hearing, because the onus is on you. You don't do it, you lose. All of a sudden you get a letter in the mail saying, hey dude, you blew it. We just blew your license for the next X amount of time, depending upon what the charges are.
These could be long cases.
Oh yeah, these cases
so
can go on forever. My last one ran almost 4 years.
Yeah, and so it's really important up front that you get somebody to critically analyze your case and make sure that any issue relating to vehicle issues is explored, any issue relating to chain of custody and the blood draw is explored, any issues regarding other witnesses is explored. And then there's going to be a long waiting game, so you better make sure that you're comfortable with who you hire, because you're going to know them for a long period of time.
Yeah, they're going to become a friend of the family. So in closing here, these are really difficult cases, and they can have a huge impact on not only you, but your family, your job. So you need to make sure that you get a good lawyer, that you get somebody who's going to basically get in the trenches with you and start lobbying the pretrial motions and whatnot to suppress things, because you can't go in there unprepared, because if the prosecutor is on their game, and a lot of them are, the last thing you do is go in there not
Can't go in
prepared.
friendly.
Yeah, you can't go in friendly, or you're going to get in a lot of trouble. So if you have an issue like this,
Well, actually, no, one thing though that you kind of do that I think is worth noting is counseling and evaluations. If there is a drug-related offense or an alcohol-related offense,
that's true.
Yeah, I mean, as our lawyers, the people who hire us, they listen to our advice. If they don't, they get a restraint. They get their retainer back and go find somebody else you want to tell how to practice law. But if we are retained and there is an alcohol or drug-related offense, we automatically start shifting towards evaluations and treatment related to those offenses, because it does produce.
It helps.
It's not the strongest, but it does produce. It does help your cases. So.
It helps dramatically, and that's something you want to do, is because in the event, if things do go sideways, but you've gone in, you've got yourself dried out, you've got, a
shows
year's
ownership.
sobriety, and you've got a year, 2 years of sobriety under your belt, prosecutors are more willing to help you out in that situation than if you're like, well, now what do I do?
Yeah, or certainly listen.
Yeah, at least listen. And man, getting a prosecutor to listen nowadays is worth a fortune.
Yeah. Anyway,
Call us.
call someone.